Mina Kimes from ESPN is kind enough to join us now. Mina, how are you?
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Of course, absolutely. So I have read about your relationship with your dad and how you grew up watching Seahawks football with him. How has he affected your love of sports?
Oh, God. Yeah, like a lot of people, came to football through my dad. He was a big Seahawks fan, Huskies football, and just always watched with him growing up and asked him a lot of annoying questions my whole life. And yeah, and so it's sort of an inherited passion of mine.
We love that. I think we all had pretty similar stories to that. Mina Taylor Doll here. I want to obviously jump over to the Jaguars. On one of your recent podcasts, you had Field Yates on, and you guys listed your top 10 best offenses in the NFL right now, and kind of had a ranking for that 1 to 10. On your list, you had the Jags sitting at number 10. Field said his was he had the Jags right outside of that, but both of your reasonings kind of surrounded questions about the offensive line. But explain that a little bit. Your feelings of that, what's good and what's kind of worrisome about the Jags offense right now.
Yeah, well, what's good? I mean, where to begin? Starts, of course, with the play of the quarterback, who, as you guys know, up close and personal, really broke out last year, particularly in the second half of the year. I loved Lawrence as a prospect, like a lot of people, and it was hard to watch that first year. It struggles, so much of them beyond his control. But one of the things that amidst those struggles and amidst his the fact that he, ranked near the bottom of the NFL in a lot of metrics, he wasn't getting sacked a lot. And, I really like that characteristic in quarterbacks when opposing defenses have a low pressure to sack rate, because I think it speaks for their athleticism, their feel in the pocket, their vision. In Lawrence's case, something we saw at the end of last season, just how quickly he was getting the ball out. And so for him to kind of be able to put it all together in what I thought was a very well-called offense was just really a joy to watch. And I think he did that despite the fact that there were some lapses in protection in the second half of the season still. So going into this year, I really like their ability to build on what they did. I think Doug Peterson is a fantastic play caller. The addition of Calvin Ridley is super exciting, because last time we saw him playing football, he was one of the better receivers in the NFL. But, offensive line remains a concern, especially with the question mark tackle. I think Lawrence does a lot to mitigate that with his quick release and his ability to avoid sacks. But we're talking about a team that seems poised to have, to once again, to win the division. And I think you tend to look for, well, what are the small things that could stop them from doing that? And that's something that jumps out to me.
Statistically speaking, Mina, and then also looking at it from a national perspective, how much do you look at the Jaguars' last 7-8 games of last year, and is it lightning in a bottle versus turning a corner and tangible things that you could see carrying over to the next season?
Oh, I think there's a lot that's going to carry over, and I think that's a big reason why just about everyone I've spoken to has Jacksonville as the favorites to win the division. I think Lawrence's play, to me, was very stable, meaning it wasn't just like, oh, I got lucky and he ran into the crappy defenses. Like, no, he was doing all of the things quarterbacks do that tend to repeat year to year, that play inside the pocket, ability to read defenses, that quick release and execution. And then the fact that, I kind of alluded to, the skill group is going to be better with Ridley. So all of that seems sustainable. And then defensively, this is was a pass defense that was really up and down over the course of the season. But you saw some flashes of things that I think bode well for this year. I think the play of the cornerbacks, went to move Darius Williams outside, and I think Tyson Campbell showed a lot of promise. And then up front, it was a pass rushing group that really affected the quarterback, but just didn't get a lot of sacks. And I actually think that bodes well for this year, even with the loss of Arden Key, who was a big contributor, because at some point those sacks are going to come. And I think a player like Trayvon Walker, you always expected to be better in year 2 than year 1.
And Mina, to that point, ESPN's Mina Kimes with us. Most of us here in Jacksonville expected the Jaguars to sign a pretty big name in free agency as far as the pass rush goes, to add to Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker. And certainly they haven't yet. So how are they going to get to the quarterback? That's been a big question here.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just be blunt. Walker's got to play like pick 1-1, you know. We saw some glimpses of it last year. I think they were kind of figuring out how best to deploy him. He was always going to be a little bit raw coming into the NFL because of how he was used as Georgia. But I think just, you know, having him out there with his hand in the dirt, and I think just some of the ways in which he's likely to develop in terms of his pass rush moves and his plan from year 1 to 2, that's the single most important thing for Jacksonville up front, because you're right, they didn't add anyone, but they also have 2 very high draft picks up there. So, and then I also think with the linebacking group, you know, Devin Lloyd definitely had some rookie struggles, which are not uncommon for off-ball linebackers in the NFL, but I could see him making, you know, improving as well a lot from year 1 to 2. This is a young group, and they seem to be betting on development rather than adding outside talent.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously you just mentioned some of the moves that in this last offseason, which a lot of people kind of felt the approach was a little interesting just because they didn't really address the pass rush. That corner was another one of the major needs they felt like they needed to address, and they didn't until later into the draft. So some people are kind of questioning, but it looks like Doug and Trent were just kind of comfortable with what the roster is and building from within. Were you surprised by that at all, or do you think that they have enough comfortability in what they have to go along with building off of last season?
You know, I think given the difficulty of the slate of quarterbacks you're facing in the AFC, especially again if your aspirations are not just to make it to the playoffs but to win in the playoffs, which is where Jacksonville should be, I wouldn't have minded seeing them make some additions in pass defense, either up front or on the back end. But I can see the logic because of the pedigree of the players in the front. And then also, you know, and I kind of alluded to this, I really did think the corners played better as the year went along. But yeah, it is a bet on not just one, but a number of players making a leap from, you know, last year to this year. And that's always precarious. You never know, right? But I do think I understand the reasoning behind it.
Let's segue to something different. The show is called Helmets and Heels, Mina, and I do get the show. You know what that means. Loved your interview with Dan on South Beach Sessions. And so for those who may not be familiar, let's talk a little bit about, you know, we alluded to it off the top with your dad's influence, but how you are an analyst for ESPN, the journey for you to where we currently speak with you, one of the most well-known analysts on the Mothership Network.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I don't know about that, but yeah, it's been great. You know, I've been NFL analyst at ESPN now for, I guess, about 3 or 4 years. But prior to that, I was doing radio like y'all and podcasting for the company. And before that, I was writing about football. So it was kind of going from writing about football to talking about it on the radio to talking about it on television. Just really grateful to have a lot of folks at ESPN, producers, who kind of believed in me along the way and gave me bigger opportunities to talk about the sport, because it's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, it's a dream job, you know.
Well, especially because, and for those who may not be familiar, you actually didn't start out in sports either. You were writing on the business side of things, also an Ivy League graduate. So if I had told you, 25 years ago that you are a NFL analyst on ESPN, what would young Mina have said?
Would have been pretty shocked. Not just NFL analyst, but yeah, like as you said, being a sports writer, which is something I started off as. I was an investigative reporter. Very different skill set, but some similarities in terms of the research and preparation and asking questions. There's more through lines than you might think.
Mina, maybe before you were on TV, this question would apply a little bit more, but one of my favorite things is, especially if I go out of town and I end up in a sports conversation with guys, they'll be so shocked that I have any idea what I'm talking about. And so again, now that you're on TV, probably that doesn't happen very often, but before that, when you were podcasting and writing, did that ever happen to you?
A lot of it was for me kind of internally, or I guess externally, whenever I get opportunities to talk X's and O's. I encountered a little bit of surprise, not just that it was something I was capable of, but even interested in. But I will say a big part of the reason why I've been able to make the transitions I have at ESPN is because along the way, so many other analysts who are almost overwhelmingly former players really embraced me and loved the idea of having someone from the outside come in. And we've just been able to learn from each other.
I love that. Mina, speaking of the X's and O's, I want to kind of loop back into the football world because you mentioned a few times how you see the Jags, or most people see the Jags as the favorite for the AFC South. And when you're looking at those other three teams, they could all potentially have new quarterbacks at some point this season with Stroud, Levis, and Richardson. Which one of those quarterbacks do you see starting first and making the most immediate impact?
I think both Stroud and Young are probably going to start. Will Levis will be the last for, Ryan Tannehill. Your guys' division rival is still in place there. And I think, immediately I would suspect that Young would have the most success just because he's in probably the best situation of the three. Panthers have a nice offensive line. Whereas Stroud, there could be some growing pains there. I think the Texans have a few of their core pieces in place, but still kind of lacking in terms of skill players, and there's just so many new players and new offensive coordinator. It take a while to gel.
Landscape-wise, I don't know, I already kind of asked you 30,000 foot what the rest of the nation looks at the Jaguars as, but when it comes to Trevor Lawrence, Mina, I know everyone loves to do quarterback rankings. Everybody loves to do rankings within the division. When you look at the trajectory of this team, what is the ceiling for Trevor? Is he in the same conversation as a Patrick Mahomes or a Joe Burrow just yet?
Not yet, just because we're really going off of one season. But, when you combine that season with what we saw in college and how early it's happening, it's hard not to be excited. On my show, the Mina Kimes show, we did quarterback draft for the next 3 years was our timeline. And Trevor, I believe, went 7th, which is pretty impressive for someone his age. So, if things keep going in this direction, I think it's easy to see him in that top tier with Mahomes, Burrow, Allen, Herbert, et cetera, after this year.
Absolutely. All right, Mina, I will ask you one final question, and that is Anthony Richardson. I am a Gator fan, so I watched every snap of his collegiate career. How do you think he'll do in the NFL with the Colts?
I was so happy that Richardson ended up with the Colts because he's the kind of quarterback where I do think situation matters a lot. And if he had ended up in a situation where he didn't have an offense coordinator who he saw really develop an offense around the skills of a dual threat quarterback the way Shane Steichen, who's their head coach, who was the play caller in Philadelphia, did, I would be a little bit more nervous because I do think there'll be a bit of a development curve. But there's so much I liked about Richardson's game in college, both physically and mentally, and I think he has the tools to succeed in the NFL.
Well, we certainly shall see.
Yeah, we will. I think we're torn on that one. At least Lauren is, because being the Gator fan. Final one for me, Mina, really quick, because when you're looking at the NFL as a whole, you know which teams sit at the top. You know those 1 through 5s. But is there a team this season that you could see kind of shocking some people and making a move up?
Ooh, sort of the shock the world team. I was just been working on different power rankings this year, and I feel like a lot of us have kind of the same teams near the top. I'll say this, this isn't a team that would shock the world because I do think most people are fairly high on them, but I really like the Baltimore Ravens. I really liked what I saw from that defense at the end of last season, and I'm super excited to see this new offense under Todd Monken with all the additions that they made there. So that's a team that I think has a Super Bowl ceiling, and potentially, most people don't have them winning the division, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do.
The running back room, as long as they stay healthy,
Mm-hmm.
I think that definitely gives them a chance. And then just from me, Mina, on the personal side of things, one story I've heard you tell before that I really appreciate is, as a woman in sports, how you deal with the trolls. And as someone who has a lot of those who may or may not be listening currently and love to hit us up on the text line, brought to you by Lifetime Enclosures, I'm just curious, if you could share any wisdom for females in sports and how you silence the haters and make winners out of those who are supporting you.
Well, I would say the number one thing is to really set your filters so you don't see most of it. I have it set up that way. And then pick your spots. I very rarely reply, but I genuinely do when I see an opportunity to make a joke. So
We love the jokes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the best way to handle it. Well, Mina, we cannot thank you enough for your time, and we certainly appreciate all of your insight as well.
No problem. Bye, guys. No problem. Bye, guys.